All right, this is the Smokin Hot tip of the week, of course, brought to you every week by Texas Star Grill Shop. And we're with DJ Mentzel again at Texas Star Grill Shop up in the Woodlands. I got a question for you before we get into the Smokin Hot tip, and it is literally going to be smoking this week because we're going to be talking about different kinds of woods and such. But we were chatting a little bit before we came on here, DJ, and I know you're a competition cook, and you've won a lot of hardware. But it got me thinking because we've talked to some of the biggest names in barbecue here. Do you have maybe idol is a little bit strong, but do you have like one or two guys or girls that you're like that's the one that's the one that really gains my respect? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, you know who I really do. I really appreciate a lot, and he's done a lot of great stuff for the space. Is Leroy.
Yeah,
Leroy Lewis up there in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Just because he's gone behind the scenes a lot, and talked about the business side of things and how to run things and how to make margins and also how to prep. He goes a lot deeper into the inside. Obviously, he makes great quality food. I've ate their best beef cheeks I've ever had in my life. Just fantastic stuff. And I mean, he's grown significantly. He's finally at the food truck and he's got a space up there, and he does a lot. He adds kind of like a lot of chef creativity to it. I do love barbecue, and I do love traditional barbecue. I do feel like there's still potential to grow and evolve and get even better. And people like him who are pushing the bar, so I'm a big fan of him. Aaron Franklin's also the guy who just blew the space up. He really popularized barbecue a lot, especially high end, just quality stuff. He's I reference him all the time as the barbecue Elvis per se. He might not be the best anymore, but he's definitely one of the greatest of all time. So he's somebody else I really appreciate and look up to, I would say.
Well, good. Yeah, I wanted to get that because I like to hear that. And you talk about the chef aspect. That's why I like the Feegises so much, Patrick Feegis and them over there, because they do a big they have a big influence on that. But let's get into the Smokin Hot tip now, because all right, so you're starting you got a cook planned. You're going to cook whatever meat it is, and maybe I'll leave that blank right now. But a lot of times you it's a habit. You get into what kind of wood you're going to smoke with. Oak is big time in Texas. Mesquite is big time in South Texas. Then there's hickory. And then there's pecan. And then there's cherry. And then there's some I'm probably missing that you can help me out with. But when you're getting ready to cook a piece of meat, I'm guessing that's not just a mood. Like how do you decide what you're going to do? Are you just a lot of people just say I'm going to cook with oak and it's just always going to be oak?
Yeah, I mean, I probably fall into that category too often than not. I do love my post oak, and I do use a lot of post oak, and that's just kind of a staple here, more central Texas and in the Houston area. But you can really go a variety of ways, and there is a lot of wood choices out there, and plenty that you didn't. You get peach, you get maple, you get all sorts of apples and stuff like that, and it really does depend on which kind of cut of meat you're going with. You definitely like to see softer fruit woods on your more like chickens and stuff. So apple, and you see it also in pork. That's why you see a lot of apple smoked bacon and stuff like that. So.
What about when I grew up, and obviously I've been in Houston, in the greater Houston area for 35 years now, but growing up, that was mesquite country. That was a lot of mesquite down there in South Texas, where my family's from, where my dad grew up, and it's a strong wood, but it does have a place, doesn't it? Where would you put mesquite?
Yeah, I love mesquite for higher temperatures. You grilling like snapper over mesquite is fantastic. Even grilling steaks and fajitas, because it's so strong of a smoke, you can still get some of that smoke at higher temperatures. Typically, the higher temperatures you're going, you're burning too clean. You're not getting as much smoke flavor out of it. But mesquite being such a good strong wood that you can still get some of that kind of flavor at the higher temperatures that I enjoy. Mesquite's definitely, and typically barbecue what wood you use is just what's been on your land, what's been around you.
Yeah.
It's very that. A lot of woods can be very all-encompassing. Hickory, pecan, oak, you see is the most common all-purpose woods. But mesquite, it's definitely something really good for high temperature cooks. And still mixing in mesquite with some oak, it is still a great flavor wood. You just have to be careful with it on long cooks is all.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that was going to be my next question. Like you said, oak, hickory, pecan, kind of staples, kind of steady.
Mhm.
But I knew it was a friend of my father's that was just like him and used to really like to smoke a lot of meat. But they would start with mesquite. They would go low and slow,
Yeah.
and then they would change the wood. They would
Right.
they would change the wood to, I believe he went with cherry. He went from mesquite to cherry, which is
Okay.
a lot softer, a lot
Sure.
lighter. Is that something that they're overthinking, or is that something that can have an effect on things?
No, it will definitely. If you're doing, let's say, a brisket, if you do the whole thing in just mesquite, it's just too pungent. It would be too harsh.
Mm-hmm.
So doing it at the beginning is going to allow you to get a lot of that flavor, and then you mix it with a more softer wood with a softer smoke profile. It's going to allow you to keep a lot of that good smoke flavor without just making it too encompassing of that putrid wood.
Well, I'm glad because I always wondered about that, and I've tinkered with it myself and not really noticed a whole lot. But then again, I was probably using oak, not mesquite, and I was wondering if you can actually soften the taste with some of those lighter woods like that.
Yeah, it's not so much that the cherry's softening the flavor; it's more so that you're softening the exposure to the hardwood.
Okay.
So you're not cooking as long with the mesquite. So you'll see that a lot of time is they'll start. Let's say you start your coal bed. You get it with oak, and then you throw like a mesquite log on there. Once that burns out, you go back to oak the rest of the way, per se. That gives you a lot of that good mesquite flavor in the beginning process where a lot of your smoke flavors penetrate.
Now, you also mentioned peach and maple and apple. Now I know you're an oak guy, and a lot of us are here in Texas. I like to use oak and hickory, a mix, but it doesn't matter. Where would you use peach, maple, and apple for those listeners that are like, okay, where would I do that?
Yeah, a lot of chicken and stuff. You don't want too much smoke on chicken for sure. You see it a lot in chicken and stuff like that. Now, peach and stuff is really popular, especially out in like Georgia, right?
Mhm.
They have so many peach trees. It's also good on pork butts and ribs. So a lot of times where you'll see these different fruit woods and these soft woods is more on pork or chicken for sure.
Now let's simplify it. Can you go wrong with just oak all the time if you're a listener, or should they
No.
experiment?
Yeah, no. I think you should experiment all the time because everybody's flavor profile is different. Some people might actually, that's why some people love hickory, some people just love pecan, and I love oak. They're all nuanced, and so everybody's flavor profile is nuanced. So I definitely recommend experimenting. But if you just did oak for everything, you're going to be fine.
Or the other two, pecan and hickory, right?
Yeah, or pecan and hickory. Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Kind of staples.
All right, so let me throw a couple of things out there that have always piqued my interest, and I've experimented, like you just talked about. What about fishes, like a salmon or maybe a tuna? I'm honest, like I said, I cook with oak and hickory. Sometimes the salmon gets a little strong for me, and you miss the fish flavor.
Yeah. That's why you see a lot of like cedar planks where people kind of grill with cedar planks. It's a kind of soft wood and you're not really smoking with it. You kind of soak a cedar plank that imbues a little bit of smoke. Unless you're doing like smoked salted salmon, you typically do want to use a softer smoking wood there. That's somewhere like apples be really good where you're just getting a little bit of the flavor. You don't want too much smoke in my experience on fish. Which is why I typically grill it at a higher temperature, with mesquite. You can kind of get away with it, but then you can do the same thing with oak and everything. You see it all there.
And last one. My father-in-law did this, and it was the best thing ever. And for the life of me, I don't know what he cooked it on. He went to Alaska and went fishing and had the whole smoked slow salmon. He had some sockeye salmon. What about something like that where you're not going kind of hot and fast?
Yeah, that'd be kind of like a cured salmon, right? You're smoking the salmon, you're making it, you're preserving it in that way, right? We have different ways that we've preserved salmon in the past with, either it be like salted salmon or smoked salmon and stuff like that. It's great. It's just a totally different flavor profile. You're not gonna when you smoke it a long time like that, it's just a different flavor profile, different experience than you smoke it a little bit and grill it. It's a totally different experience.
How about that? We learned something today. That's why DJ is always on this show with the Smokin Hot tip of the week. DJ, we're going to do it again next week because I got a question about pits and stuff, which you I've got surrounding you right now over at. But sometimes the pits, people sort of gloss over what they need. So we'll do that next week. Right now, thank you to you. Thank you to Jess Pryles, who joined us on today's podcast. She is awesome and a superstar. She's one of those superstars you were talking about earlier. She really is. She's an open flame whiz. Either way, thank you guys for listening. Thank you to Jess. Thank you to DJ. And of course, to Texas Star Grill Shop. Don't forget, this podcast posts every week wherever you get your podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, and everywhere else. You guys have a great week, a great weekend. It's tailgate season. Go see my guy DJ out at the Woodlands. And until then, smoke it up, and we will talk to you next time. All right, so we're just going to continue on this same one.
Yeah.
And then I'll get you out. So what I was thinking on this is, a lot of times people say, well, the most important,
you're not looking.
Yeah. There you go. You can say that. But also they say, okay, well, the most important thing is the meat, and it is. The second most important thing before you get started is making sure that you know what you trust yourself. That's what I'm going to be talking about, and the pit and all that, and the thing you just said. So here we go. All right, we have the Smokin Hot tip of the week again out at the Woodlands at Texas Star Grill Shop, which of course brings us this podcast every single week. And the great thing about Smokin Hot tip is you get into some of the minutia that people tend to forget. We have guests that join us. Obviously, DJ could talk about this. DJ Mentzel joining us. Some of the grand scheme of cooking a brisket or cooking a shoulder or whatever it may be. But the minutia starts before you even really light the fire. We've talked about meat a lot. DJ, today I want to talk about the pit and the habits that people fall into, because a lot of us are just not very patient people. And if you don't have patience, you're going to sink in this game. But let's start with the pit itself. Now, the obvious point is you got to make sure that it's clean and it's good and it's everything is in order on your pit. So let's start right there. A lot of times people say, "Oh, I'm gonna go cook a brisket or I'm gonna cook some ribs." Open the pit, light the fire, boom, they go. But they might be skipping a very important step here. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you definitely got to make sure. What does depend on the vehicle and stuff like that. But you definitely want to clean it out, make sure that it's all the ash is gone, so you have proper airflow for, say, on like an offset. If you don't clean out all that ash and stuff that's left over from the last burn, you're just not going to get proper airflow to start and get a good coal bed. And ultimately, what manages the fire the best is just proper airflow. So you definitely want to go through that, and you definitely want to make sure everything's cleaned up, because the last thing you want to do, you get leftover residue on your grates and such. And if you just go throw this brand new piece of meat, it's going to pick up some of that old residue, and that can typically leave like a little bit of an acrid taste.
And the pit itself, whether it's my offset or my pellet grill, everything just kind of cakes on there if you do a lot of cooking. And while that can be good, quote, seasoned, there also are areas where it affects airflow. There's bits and pieces falling around as you're opening and closing the pit, etc. Correct?
Yeah, you want to do some kind of deep cleaning every once in a while, because it kind of creates a soot all the way around the entire barrel or chamber of your cooking apparatus. And if you don't scrape that out and clean that out every couple months or so, when you're cooking, you can just have a big, huge flake of pretty much just soot and char just laying on your brisket. And that's not very edible. So you definitely do want to keep a maintenance on that. So,
yeah. Now let's talk about cooking itself. Brisket is the big one, of course, and there are others. But I've seen so many people. I got to check the fire. I got to check the pit. I got to check the meat. Man, sometimes you do. Sometimes you do have to check it. You do have to stay on top of it. But what's that fine line that we're talking about here?
Check the temperature on the outside. Try not to open up the grill as little as possible. If you're doing a brisket, there's really no reason to check it and open it for the first probably 4 hours. 3 hours at the least. You just have to trust yourself and trust your temperature control. Now, if you're having a hard time managing the fire, you might want to look and see if you're getting too hot on a spot per se, but even then you'd want to keep it very minimalized. You can always get like a leave-in thermometer that takes the ambient temperature of the grill, so you can kind of monitor that from the outside. Because, as they say, if you're looking, you're not cooking. So the last thing you want to do is constantly open that lid and just, when you open the lid and open up the chamber, you're just spiking your temperature down. And then when that's going to add extra oxygen into the area, which is ultimately going to raise the temperature up, then you close it, and you're going to have inconsistent temperatures. So the best thing you can do is just really trust yourself and trust the temperature that you're getting on either your gauge or your internal thermometer, and just manage the fire.
I've seen it drop 30 degrees.
Easily. Yeah. And if you're, I get it. We're all excited. Most people in the backyard, they want to make sure that it's going right.
What does it look like?
Yeah, it's a brisket. You're talking about maybe $100 piece of meat. You want to make sure you're not ruining it. And that can be difficult if you're still new to it. But you really just have to trust the process there a little bit and try not to look in there as little as possible.
What about managing the fire? That doesn't, a lot of people realize, think that, you manage fire, you put, whatever, you slide open the little flap or whatever you want to call it. A lot of times I like to leave the door open some. You get better airflow, correct?
Yeah, there's like some people are vents where they manage the vents.
That's the word I couldn't remember.
Yeah, because some people manage vents, and I'm like you. I use the door, and I kind of can just see it 1/2 inch versus 1 inch, and I can kind of know if I just put on a log, I know it's closer to close, and then when it's getting longer, I can just slowly open it, and that's how I've learned to manage my fires over time. But it's just kind of a preference there. Ultimately, you can open it up and look at it and then close it back a lot easier to check on your fire and make sure you're having proper fire management with the door system. So I typically recommend the door system over the vent system, because if your temperatures are starting to drop and you open the vent, it could just be an airflow issue, and you can't necessarily look as easily through the vent. Where if you open that door, you can say, oh, hey, a log split in half and it's kind of snuffing itself out. So let's move this around a little bit.
And that's just trial and error, correct? Because someone once asked me, if I put a log this big on top of a fire that's 220 degrees, let's say, I forget exactly what he said, how much will it raise the temperature and how fast? And I'm like, dude.
That's way too hard of a conversation. That's way too hard of a question to ask anybody. It really does. There's so many variables there. It's the pit. It's the amount of coals you got. Did you dry the wood out? Yeah, the weather. Did you dry that log out on top of the firebox previously? Is it somewhat wet? Is it fully kiln drying? It can be so many various answers there. And
if you have dry wood, it's probably a little more consistent, but you just touched on something else, like new wood that you're buying wherever, set it on top of the firebox, correct?
Yeah, it's best. What happens is when you put in a new log, it kind of adds in a little bit of dirty smoke per se, because it's burning off whatever left. Even kiln drying, there's going to be just a little bit of moisture, so it's going to burn off whatever little bit of moisture is left, and it kind of puffs out a little bit of dirty smoke, and it can kind of flare up a little bit and spike the temperature just subtly. So if you get a log and put it on top of the firebox, it's going to preheat it and temp it, so that way when you put it in the fire, it's a much more smoother process. Just a small little bit.
Last thing here for you, and this is something that I'm asking for myself as much as anyone, because I wrestle with this all the time. You have your smokestack, you have good airflow. I'm feeling pretty good about my cook, and then sometimes it just seems like it's going pretty fast. How much do you damper down the chimney? The vent on top.
I try not to mess with the damper at all. Personally, I try to leave that pretty full open, just because I like the draw that it brings. I will dampen it down if my fire is running high. That's about when I will. If I'm running high and maybe I just the log I put on is just too good of an airflow or whatever, and I've already closed the gate. I've already closed my door and got it nice and close, and it's still spiked up too high. That's about the only time I'll I'll shut down my baffle. But typically, I do like to cook with my stack wide open just for the best draw.
Yeah. Well, that's reassuring because that's about the only time I do it. Sometimes I just panic. Panic is part of a barbecuer's life.
It's definitely there as a tool to use. Right. It's definitely there for a reason. And if your temperatures are running away from you a little bit, you can slow that down and it kind of simmer down some of the draw and the oxygen flow. It's going to help lower that temperature.
Man, every week we learn something from you, DJ. You should do this for a living.
Yeah. If only I could sit around and talk barbecue and sell barbecue equipment. That'd be
yeah. If only that could happen, man. We really appreciate it. You're the best, and I know a lot of our listeners. We get good feedback, learn a lot, and I know they learned something from today. So appreciate you joining us, and thanks to everybody who always subscribes and listens to this podcast on iTunes and Spotify and Podbean. And we really appreciate you guys listening. DJ, we're going to do it again. Until then, you guys have a great week, great weekend. Smoke it up, and we will talk to you next time.